our first question comes to us from our fabulous viewer, DJ Phillips.
DJ.
Who gave us permission to say his name. Otherwise, I don't. But DJ has been on our show, and he's a wonderful... And by the way, I sent the message up to you afterwards, but last week he was very concerned because I didn't say a happy birthday to you from him on the air. And DJ calls me on these things.
I love DJ. DJ, thank you. I did get your birthday wishes. Sarah, my assistant, actually told me. And so thank you so much, DJ. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. And I checked DJ to make sure that, and Sarah said, no, already delivered. So it was all good. But DJ wrote in and asked if he could be first. And I like to, DJ does all kinds of things for us. He monitors, he keeps Kelby and I on our toes.
It's fabulous.
It is fabulous. Okay, so my question is, I believe in recovery, DJ writes, but since there is no cure for autism, how can there be recovery from autism?
Yeah,
it's a great question.
It's a very deep question. These are the types of things DJ throws at us. I love it. You know, for many years, there's been a lot of controversy about both the word recovery and the word cure. I being sort of English being my second language, I'm not very convinced there's a huge difference in the two. There is somewhat of a difference. It's a very kind of subtle difference, I suppose. But let me tell you how I think about it. The way that I look at it is that from the perspective of a diagnostician. So, you know, we all go through life and we all have different strengths and weaknesses. And if our behaviors, let's say, are differences, you know, like for instance, I might need 8 hours of sleep, you might need 5. I might have a reaction to certain types of people, you might, whatever, we're all different. But if our differences get to a point where they become, they make it difficult for us to go through life, like they become incapacitating. Let's say because of something that is you have a hard time at work. Because of something in your behavior, you can't establish relationships. Various things like that. If those things exist and they exist to a level that is damaging to the individual, in other words, it keeps the individual isolated, it makes the individual non-functional, non-adaptive, then those things are considered a disorder or a disability. So I always, as you know, Shannon, I use the example of alcoholism because it's just one of those interesting diagnoses. You know, and if you cannot diagnose someone on having alcohol dependence or alcohol abuse based on how much they drink. It has nothing to do with it. All you look at is really how they interact with the world during their drinking, you know. So for instance, someone can drink a whole bottle of scotch every night, but as long as they do really well with their family and as long as they do well at work, then they're not considered to have a problem. And so these are the things that are very important, because then the meaning of recovery also interacts with that. And what that means is that you would be classified as recovered from autism, let's say, if you did not meet the specific symptoms of autism to a level that made it difficult for you to function at work and home. So let me just describe that a little bit. Symptoms of autism are you have to have these 3 specific symptoms in the area of, let's say, social communication, and you have to have these specific symptoms in the area of repetitive, stereotypical behaviors. And unless those are met, let's say out of 5 symptoms, you only have 4, then you won't classify for diagnosis of ASD. You must have the 5. Now, if you don't have the 5, let's say you still have some problems with social behavior, then your diagnosis would be something else. You know, it'd be social communication disorder, but it wouldn't be ASD. So in all reality, you could say, I've recovered from ASD, you know, because you don't have ASD, you don't qualify. ASD requires those symptoms. The same would be, for instance, if you had, let's say, a language disorder and you were diagnosed, you could say, I've recovered from that language disorder, even if you still had some problems with fluency, let's say, or if you had some difficulty expressing yourself. As long as you didn't meet the criteria, you've recovered. Now, when we define recovery for our kids with ASD, they might have smaller, kind of not so pervasive disorders still. They might have slight language disabilities. They might have slight social disorders. In fact, most of them, to some extent, in adulthood, might experience some issues with executive functioning or with working memory. They might not be able to function in multimodal situations very, very well, but they are not outside of the norm by any means. They're just like everyone else. You know, some of us do really well when there's 10 things going on. Others do really poorly when there's 10 things going on, and our kids who are recovered will fit in there somewhere.
Yeah.
So that's kind of now a cure to me means a completely different thing. It means like, it's almost, cure doesn't really apply in my mind to mental disorders of any kind, because cure to me, it's almost like there was something and we took that thing away and now you're a different, like you no longer are burdened with that thing.
Right.
With recovery, I feel like you always have some aspect of it in you, but you've learned ways to overcome it. You've learned ways to function normally in the world, even though it might be harder for you to tolerate people or sounds or whatever it is. Does that make sense? It's a little different.
It totally does. I find myself the more I learn about this, I throw in the sentence, the part of the clause, disabling aspects. So I say they have recovered from the disabling aspects of autism. They still have autism.
Right.
Their brain is still wired differently, but it's as though we went and we took all the hurdles that made it impossible for that individual to do what they want to. Not what we want them to do, but what they want.
Okay, and I'll take that a little step further, because they don't still have autism, because if they did, they would have all 5 symptoms. Now, don't forget, we made up the name autism.
Right.
We defined autism as not a state of being, but a state of being that is defined by these 5 symptoms.
Yes.
So if you don't have those, you cannot say I have ASD. Right?
Well, but I think there is a growing movement of people who want to have autism and ASD, which is the disorder. There are people who say there are parts of my autism that are not a disorder.
Right.
I think we need to find a whole new lexicon, whole new set of words because we shouldn't be saying autism, we should be saying autisms, and as people like you phenotype it, and I know that's something that you're working on.
Sure.
That we're going to start to have, different names for things. I did a blog a while back and said, why don't we throw it all out and start saying, well, my son has blue-green davuvo with a rising LO, right?
Yeah.
Right? Which will
Absolutely.
describe, because when I say my son is on the autism spectrum and Nancy says her son is on the autism spectrum, it sounds like the same thing and it's not.
They're so different.
Yeah.
Now, I have so many thoughts about this. DJ, look what you got us started on.
Yes. See, we're excited, DJ.
Because, see, the thing for me is, Shannon, that I have already been through 5 DSMs. Okay, so when I started autism, the definition of autism was completely something else. At DSM-3, it required 16 symptoms. That's it. Then there was DSM-4, then there was DSM-4R, then there was DSM-5. It constantly changes, right?
Right.
So when a diagnosis, and these symptoms must be present for you to have, and now the name has even changed, right? It used to be autism, it became autistic disorder, now it became autism spectrum disorder, it's always something. And so when that happens, it basically when I give lectures, I always say what that means is we don't really know what we're talking about, right? Because you can't really take a disorder or something, right? A state of being. Let's not even call it a disorder. Let's just call it a state of being and redefine it every few years, right? That means either the state of being is changing drastically or we're becoming much more aware of what it means to have that.
Right.
Which I think it's the latter. I think the spectrum is huge. And I think we still insist on putting all these individuals in one box.
Right.
And as long as we do that, it's going to still change definition, because the person with Asperger's, which it falls under ASD, and the person with severe autistic disorder are not the same. They're quite different. Now, but all of that aside, there's one reason, there's essentially, let's say, one reason which leads to a few other things that we actually do want to call it something.
Yeah.
That reason is help.
Right, funding.
If we don't call it something,
Yes.
it's not just funding. Funding is a result, right? Funding is like, if you have ASD, you'll get funding now. Okay, so that's a great thing, and it requires that name. But the other side is, imagine if you got funding, but now we started and said, hey, what should we do with you? Maybe we should do magnetic therapy. Maybe we should do running. Maybe we should, it's the connection of the intervention with the thing. So it's kind of like, oh, history has shown that ABA works with individuals with these issues, with this specific being, sense of being, ABA works. You know what? If you didn't have that name of ASD or autism, you wouldn't get ABA. You might get something else.
Well, and
And
I
so
appreciate
that's
that.
important. So grouping people is the same as what I'm very passionate about is phenotyping. It's
Yeah.
the same reason. When you group people, for instance, we group all individuals who are blind
Right.
because they will learn Braille.
Right.
And that will allow them to communicate. Now, have they recovered or been cured? Well, they've been cured. They haven't been cured, obviously, but they've recovered from the disability of not being able to communicate and so on. We've taught
Right.
them a way to communicate now.
Yes.
Okay. So autism, in a sense, is the same thing. It's not like we're changing the inner person.
Right.
We're giving them ways to integrate into society. That's it. If we didn't, and that's my answer, that's always my answer to people who say, but I don't want to change. Okay, then you can't integrate into this society. This society has some rules. Maybe someone who goes and lives in, let's say, the mountainous, villages of Nepal will not need to learn the same communication and attention and so on and so forth that is part of this society. But if you want to integrate with other people, there's a set of rules.
Yeah.
And we all have to adhere to those rules, not just you. I have to adhere to them too. When I go to a movie theater, I also can't scream.
Right.
I also can't get up and move around 10 times. I also have to be aware of all the people around me. I also have to tolerate lights like this. It might be harder for you, it probably is, but other things are harder for me. So to me, it's all one thing. It's a choice.
Exactly.
It's a choice, and because autism is a childhood disorder, parents get to choose.
Yes.
It's really that simple. Parents get to choose for their children whether they would like them to go through a few years of intensive intervention to learn ways to acclimate and adapt and be part of society or not.
And I think the word, I'm so glad you used the word, it's a choice, because I think it's important. It's a ridiculous example, but I remember my mother teaching us when we were kids. She said, I'm going to teach you how to clean a house.
Yes.
That doesn't mean you're going to grow up and keep a clean house.
That's right.
But you have the skills, so if you choose to do it, you will know what to do.
Exactly.
And when people talk about, well, maybe he wants to grow up, talking about my son, maybe he wants to grow up and he doesn't want to do that. That's fine. But I want for him, if he does that, for it to have been a choice, not what he was left with because of a disorder.
Because he wasn't given the opportunity.
Exactly.
That's absolutely the most important thing. And now autism, and I will be brave again and take it a step further, with the current prevalence rates, it becomes less and less of an individual choice, because with 1 in 65 individuals, or as we believe 1 in 55 individuals now, it also starts to become a financial burden on society.
Yes.
Because if you don't learn to communicate, if you don't learn enough things to actually hold down a job, if you don't learn how to be safe, if you don't learn how to not hurt others, then society will have to take care of you. And society will have to mold around you rather than you molding to society. So with these numbers, it becomes harder and harder for us to just say, sure, everyone who has ASD can pick and choose. Fact is, it's impossible for society to mold to as many different individuals as there are now.
Nancy and I have a study that we're going to talk about later in the show that is just recently out, talking about dollar amounts of how expensive it is to take care of an individual who is a child on the autism spectrum, and how expensive it is to take care of an adult. and the numbers are wildly different.
Yes.
So, and this is one of the things that is hard when we're talking to politicians, trying to get people on board. We've come a long way with getting ABA funded, but we have to sit down and explain. We had to do that in California with the governor. Look, we know this is expensive to treat kids, but so maybe you spend $200,000 over the next couple of years on ABA, quality ABA for this child, but you're going to save millions because it's $2.5 million to take care of this child if you don't.
Yeah, and I don't know which study you'll be reviewing, but there's also studies, Shannon, that talk about not just the cost of taking care of this individual if you don't, but it also, you have to realize, you have to also add the cost of the parents of that individual not being able to work because they are taking care of this individual. So that's also part of the added cost. It's an incredible, it just accumulates hugely over the cost of a lifetime.
It's huge. It's huge. So we are going to be talking about that later. But DJ, you see what you started a firestorm. I hope you're happy. Yeah, very good. We're going to take a short break, and then we're going to come back and answer a question that came in on the Facebook. Actually came in on the CARD Facebook site talking about romance and that kind of sexual attraction and all of that, and where to go as a resource for that for our individuals on the spectrum. So stick with us. More of Ask Dr. Doreen after these messages. Welcome back to Autism Live and to Ask Dr. Doreen. We're here with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh. She is answering your questions in real time. We had a question that actually came in on the CARD Facebook site, and they shared that with us so that we could answer it here. They wrote in and said, "Hey there, I'm wondering if you have any videos or knowledge in regards to young adults and romance/sexual attraction with autism/Asperger syndrome. Whilst I've known about the condition for years and have done all of the above, I'm curious to find out more information and to see things that I may be doing wrong, right, or may never have thought about doing in regards to communication and emotion." And I was sharing with Dr. Granpeesheh during the break that this is a very real issue for our young adults and adults who are on the autism spectrum, that they want to connect with other people and to have happy romantic sexual encounters and relationships. And when it doesn't happen, it's so, I hear from them, and it's so frustrating for them that my heart bleeds. Right. There are a lot of different resources, and we can talk about some of the places. One of the things that I always recommend is to go to, I can't think of Alex's site, weirdplanet.net.
Yes.
And Alex Plank, Wrong Planet, thank you. Wrongplanet.com. I couldn't come up with it. Wrongplanet.net. Forgive me, Alex. You can slap me later. Alex is a good friend of mine. Alex Plank created that site when he was 16 years old, and it is just for individuals who are on the spectrum to be able to connect with each other. Make sure that you go to .net, not .com. Wrongplanet.net. And he has some videos on there. I believe some of them are with Dr. Liz Lageson, where they talk about flirting, and she walks him through how to flirt, how much eye contact to make, to have it be right, and how much is creepy. Because there's a small fine line, right? Yes. And I just find that they're done really well and with humor, but good content.
And that's great.
Yes.
I mean, and Liz is fantastic. She has a really good program also for social development for younger, like teenagers, essentially, and social interaction, which covers some of this stuff as well, her peers program. And Liz is an example of the type of person that could help you go through this. At CARD, we have a series of supervisors who are, I guess, trained or experienced to work with higher functioning individuals. It's sort of more of our executive functioning cognition type people, and we will work them through this. I recently have started using much more of our psychologists, our healthcare clinic. We have a healthcare clinic with licensed psychologists, and I find that here at CARD, Dr. Daniel Oakley is very experienced with teenagers and issues of suicide and anxiety, depression, also sexuality and so on. And a lot of that is what you get through cognitive behavior therapy. It's not ABA, it's talk therapy. It's basically taking you through and explaining you. It's more like cognitive, mental exercises and things you can do to help with, just self-confidence. A lot of, I think, it's funny because I read this thing you just read, and I think to myself, anyone could say this. Any teenager
Absolutely.
could say that while I've known about, how to deal with romance and sexual attraction, I'm curious, is there more information, see how I might be doing things wrong or right, or something I've never thought of. Any teenager, this is a new experience for all teens and early 20s, right? It's a different feeling, first of all. The chemistry and the attraction to others is a very new feeling. It's funny because I was having this conversation with my daughter early this morning. And it's a very new feeling, and you don't know kind of what to do with that feeling. And then it's a very naked or transparent sharing of emotions with someone else, and it's sort of like you might have a very direct way of sharing your emotions, and the other person might have a very defensive way of sharing their emotions, or protective, and be very overwhelmed. Even though they might feel the same, they might feel very overwhelmed if you express yourself, and they might be more liking or desiring of someone who's less sharing, or whatever it is. It's the very first time in life that our true un-ego protected emotions come into contact with someone else's. And so it's much, much more complicated than teaching someone these are some techniques to use. It's not about the techniques at all. If it's about one single thing, it's about reading other people's perceptions. It's about theory of mind. Relationships and establishing or doing anything, attraction, sexual, romance, having a relationship, having a bond, is by definition the ability to read someone else's thoughts and emotions accurately and to respond to them accurately. So, and that's how we define a good relationship. So relationships where one person acts selfishly without any view of the other person's feelings or perceptions, and then this person reacts selfishly, are relationships that don't work. Mm-hmm. So my only word of advice is, if you want to get better at the social game, practice the ability to see things from other people's perspectives. That's the single thing that will help you in all aspects of life, and it really has a lot to do with that. How do you read other people's desires, their preferences? How do you understand how they are processing the world? How are they, if you were in their shoes, what would they want you to say? If you were in their shoes, what would they want you to do? That's really what relationships are about, I think.
And it's hard.
It's very hard.
It's hard for everyone, and which is why a lot of marriages don't work out and a lot of people don't get married. I've always wanted to make a board game that's called the intimacy board game.
Yes.
And one of the rules is that when you're playing with another partner, no one can get more than 2 spaces away from the other person. You can't get more than two
That's
spaces
fantastic.
ahead, or you can't be 2 spaces behind.
That's
because
fantastic.
That's, as you were saying, like if you're not, if your way of sharing is this, and there you get more than 2 spaces behind, and then the whole thing falls apart, and you got to start over again.
That's beautiful. And it's funny that you use the word intimacy, because when we study it, the way that they tell you to remember this is into me you see. And that is theory of mind. Into me you see, and that's what allows intimacy.
Yes.
And that's exactly sort of, again, goes back to being able to see other people's perspectives. So focus on that. Don't focus on the overt thing, because if you see their perspective, you'll know the things they like, the things they dislike, the things they are afraid of, the things they feel safe with, the things that attract them, all of that.
And it really is, it's a minefield. One of the things I love, the stories I love to tell, there's a movie called The Story of Luke, which is about a young man with Asperger's whose grandmother dies, and he needs to go live with other people in the family, and they have to kind of sort things out. And we had Lou Taylor Pucci, who plays Luke, on the show. He was so delightful. and we had the director on the show. There's a moment in the movie where Seth Green plays another person who's on the spectrum who pulls Luke into an office space and he says, watch this. And they're looking through the blinds as a guy walks up to the water cooler and hits on another girl in the office.
Right.
And Seth Green
That's awesome.
gives this,
I have to watch it.
You've got to watch it. Seth Green gives this detail. He's like, look, do you see the way she touches her hair and the way he looks down and she does this, that means this. And he goes through the whole thing and explains it all to Luke, who's like, how does anybody understand this,
all
right?
That. Right.
Well, Seth Green went on the Conan O'Brien show.
Right.
And they showed the clip, and Conan watched it, and he said, I needed this video when I was a teenager. I need this video now.
That's right.
Why has nobody ever explained this to me? I think every guy in this audience just had an aha moment. And I remember watching that and going, it's true.
Yes.
Nobody knows what they're doing.
And so when you talk about these things, right, that you just mentioned, what are we actually observing? We're observing cues that allow us to understand what is inside that person. It's being able to see things from that person's perspective. It's like, oh, if she did that, that means she just liked what I did. So maybe I should do more of that.
Right.
And you're right, Shannon, none of that exists. And we teach our kids, because we have them very young, we teach them how to read social cues that are appropriate to a young person.
Yeah.
We don't really get much into how to teach them to read social cues of this nature, and we should.
Yes,
we absolutely should. I just made a note of it.
Absolutely. Well, and I will say this, that we've had Evelyn Kung on the show before, and Evelyn has in her desk somewhere a bunch of cards that she has made for her older clients that have lists of things to look for and know and what to do, and they're like decision trees. And I have threatened her that if she doesn't make it into a book or an app or something, I'm going to stop speaking to her.
Right.
I've threatened her, Evelyn Kung, because they're brilliant and everyone would want them, not just people on the spectrum. Things like, you know, if I broke up with somebody and they call me, what should I do?
Yes.
Wouldn't you want that app if you had teenagers?
Honestly.
Or if you were a teenager? Okay. Anyway, I've said enough. All right. We're going to take a short break and then we got a bunch of questions to get to, so stick with us. Welcome back to Ask Dr. Doreen. We're here with Dr. Doreen Granpeesheh, and she is answering your questions in real time. One of the questions that we, first of all, we have to say that somebody wrote in and said, thank you for getting it.
That's nice.
ABA, diet, medical, legal, insurance, etc. Your show is so informative and brings so much courage. And then in a second, we'll talk about what her question was. But somebody wrote in and said, did you see Robert DeNiro on the Today Show? He talked about vaccines and autism, worth watching. And then there's a question mark. And I was just saying to Dr. Granpeesheh, for those of you who missed it, Robert DeNiro was on the Today Show last week, and then on Monday, they aired the Today Show aired another segment with Robert DeNiro where they took Al Roker, Robert DeNiro, and Janet, her last name
Jane something.
Jane, you're right.
Yes.
The other person who was
co-founder of Tribeca.
Yes, exactly. Thank you. And I have some timers now. I can pull up some names and not other names. But they took them into a separate room. It's recorded, so there is ostensibly some editing. And Al Roker again asked some of the questions. And Robert De Niro said, I have questions. She then voiced some of her concerns about the film, that she felt that at certain points they were saying one thing and at another point they were saying another thing, and she said there are inaccuracies in the film. Mm-hmm. He answered that and said there are inaccuracies in all documentaries. It's worth a discussion. Mm-hmm. She then said people should go and see the movie and see for themselves and judge for themselves. And they talked about the fact that had it been shown at Tribeca, it was a 125-seat theater. It would have been shown once, and that by refusing it, it's gotten a lot more publicity. But
that's true.
But we should say that tomorrow on the show, Nancy and I had an opportunity last week to do an extended interview. It's an hour, you guys, with Del Bigtree, who is the main producer of the film, and with Polly Tomey, who is in the movie and one of the lesser producers of the film. We should also say that you are featured in the film as an expert talking about prevalence, about autism, And we do give a disclaimer tomorrow. There is a picture of my son working with you in the film. And of course, we're talking about Vaxxed. I don't think I said that before. Vaxxed. I think anybody who doesn't know that that's what we're talking about, you've been on another planet, because that's certainly been a firestorm in our public. Do you want to, because they wanted to know if you saw the Robert DeNiro.
I saw the first Robert De Niro interview, and I was very proud, I guess, of Robert De Niro in the sense that, I think one of the main things about this whole vaccine controversy thing is that nobody wants, it's almost like we're not allowed to talk about it. And I feel like we're in America, and we should have we right now have the right to choose our own sexual preferences, gender, you name it. I mean, we can do anything now. It's like such an open, but we're not allowed to talk about this. And that kind of bothers me, because I feel like everybody should have the right to have an opinion about this. One of the things that is astonishing to me is that whether or not this is an anti-vaccine or pro-vaccine or whatever film it is, the issue of vaccines and the fear that people are told, like, hey, it's because of anti-vaccine type people that we had such an epidemic of measles in Disneyland. And the truth is about 600 people got measles. And that's nowhere close to the number of people who potentially believe that their child got autism due to the MMR vaccine. And so, when you have this many people who had measles, and yes, measles is a serious disease, but it's not in the same realm as autism, to be quite honest. Autism can be lifelong. And so, and there's thousands and thousands of people who feel themselves that there's something more to this. And we don't give disrespectful to not allow those people to voice their concerns and to say, hey, I really want this studied. And then to hear that the CDC potentially has information or studies that they're not sharing with the public is extremely concerning, because our entire world depends on what the CDC tells us. So those are the factors. It's not about so much, I think it's not anymore. I think this film, the statement that it makes that is so shocking, is more about sort of what is the information that is given to us and not given to us. And that's not just the CDC in general, it's a lot of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in the Middle East that we would never know. I listen sometimes to Al Jazeera, and it's fascinating when you hear things that that are relayed through the media here 2 days later in a completely different way.
Absolutely.
So we know that we are influenced by that information, obviously, and that information is restricted. That's what concerns me.
It concerns me too, and this is one of the things that we talked about last Thursday after the Robert De Niro interview. When did it become that we're not allowed to ask questions about anything?
Right.
I just don't understand that.
Right.
And when did it become that if somebody does ask a question publicly that they're vilified?
Right.
And certainly that has been happening to Robert De Niro. And to me, it doesn't matter where you may or may not stand on this. He should be allowed to ask questions.
Absolutely. But the other side of it, Shannon, is that it is sort of important where let's say you truly believe. Let's say this is the kind of stuff that's difficult. So let's say you have a relative whose child from one day to the next changed.
Yes.
And I actually say this on the film. I have seen children who were, let's say, siblings of a child I was treating, and I've seen them change drastically within a week. Now, I've also seen parents who come in for intake, and they'll bring with them a DVD or a video of their child, and they will show me on the video, it says that the mother is saying, and I've seen more than, I'm talking 10, 20 times I've seen this, where the mother is saying something like, and tomorrow we're going in for his MMR shots or something like that, and so it's a timestamp, and you see the child interacting with other children, playing, playful, so on, and then the next video is like right after the MMR shot, and it's like the child is limp, uninvolved, completely a different child, and you see that. Okay.
Yes.
Now, has there been a study to support this? No, there hasn't been sufficient, or if there has been, it's been hidden. That's what Vaxxed says. Now, but what's important is this. Imagine if you're the cousin of this family, right? And you see this happening and you're convinced that there is a connection, but you live in a state where you are mandated to give that very same shot to your child. And if you don't, your child will miss out on school and all other possible things. That, to me, is not right, because then your opinion doesn't matter. And those are the types of things that I feel really terrified about, because I'll be honest, I grew up in the world of autism, right? I mean, I've been doing work with autism since I was, I don't know, 15, right? I mean, my whole life has been autism. And it was a pretty scary period of time going through I'd say, like, let's say late 90s, early 2000s, when a lot of this information was coming out, and it had not yet raised enough eyebrows to be blocked. And so for me, if I had not been given the choice of what vaccinations I want to give my children at what time, that would be very concerning to me. And of course, the thing about this film is that it doesn't say don't vaccinate.
Exactly.
It says split them up and do them slightly later.
Right.
That's all it says.
Exactly.
And so it's kind of interesting that even that is such a, and because that is being fought against, it makes you wonder, like, wait a minute, why is that such a no-no? Is it just money then?
Well, and
that's what makes
and
you
certainly the questions are raised there. For me, I'm a very logical person, and when we had the measles outbreak here in Southern California, and it was such an environment of fear for months, it was such an environment of fear on all sides. One of the things that was so striking to me logically is that we had every night on the nightly news here locally, we had a doctor, a pediatrician, who would come on, and they would have a family, and there would be a small child, and they would say, this is Roberto, and Roberto has leukemia, and Roberto's father would like to say something to you. And every night they would have something like this, and Roberto's father would come forward and say, with tears, and say, I can't vaccinate my child because his immune system is compromised because he has leukemia. So I'm begging you to please vaccinate your child. And I felt that for him, but I always thought, okay, but wait a second. We've already identified that there are some children, his child, the doctor said, can't have this vaccine because of his immune system. So why are we all assuming then that we know which children can have it and which children can't? And why are people legislating, well, I already know that your child can, if we know nobody is denying that there are some children that immune system cannot handle it. How can we have a law that's one size fits all when clearly that is not the case?
That's exactly right. And if the child didn't have leukemia, we would know whether or not his immune system can handle it.
And we know that some children's immune systems can't handle it.
And that's the point. And again, no one is saying don't vaccinate your children.
Right.
The point is it okay to vaccinate them after 3?
Yeah.
Is it okay to split those vaccines up and do it after 3? That is the question. The question is not should we vaccinate or not. No one is debating that question.
And the additional question is, if the CDC isn't sure about that, why aren't they doing more studies?
Exactly. And if they are, why aren't we hearing about it?
Right.
I mean, that's all it is. And I do think it's a good film. I think it's a strong film. I think people should probably go see it. I don't even know if you can see it right now. I know it was in LA all last week.
There are lots of cities that you can go. They're in New York this week. And we're going to be covering this extensively tomorrow with Del Bigtree and Polly Tomey. You're going to get to see. It's an hour-long interview. And the one thing that, we said gloves off. We're going to ask every question that there is. But the one thing that we said was we're not going to edit at all.
Right.
So that you will see it in its entirety. They got the opportunity to say everything that they wanted to say. We got to ask every question that we wanted to ask. And
I have to say another aspect of the movie that I thought was very important was, I think, and Shannon, I've done work with autism my whole life, right? And I brought one of my friends when I went to see the movie, and my daughter, and I was, all 3 of us were crying. You know, and I said to my friend, and she said, how are you crying? You just do this for a living. And I said, you know, it doesn't matter. It's like 35 years I'm doing this. I still get emotional when I hear these stories. And I think that it's one thing the movie did extremely well was it's really brought across the perspective of the parent. And it was just extremely touching, not just Polly's, but a bunch of other parents. And it was really a very good view into the parents' experience with autism. Now, whether they feel it's vaccine related or not, just the experience of hearing your child doing these things and so on was incredible.
Yeah, and I do think it's important that one of the things that Del has said in many interviews, and you'll see tomorrow, there's a moment when Polly says something, and I ask her a follow-up question on it, and it's a very emotional gloves off moment. Yeah. I thought Polly was going to come across the table and choke me, and I said I have to ask this. You know, I mean, it's so don't think that it's all a happy interview. There's a couple of moments in it, but I do think it's time that we stop questioning when there's so many parents who say this would happen and I have evidence of it, and it maddens me sometimes when we see on the news that then they send in the pediatrician who says, well, upon reflection, those parents, you know, once we talk to them, they realize maybe there were symptoms before. I do think it's time that there is a system for reporting vaccine reactions.
Yes.
So why are we, when somebody says my child had a vaccine reaction, why are we like, oh, that couldn't have happened?
Right.
There's a whole system for reporting it, which means it exists.
Right.
So I don't know for them, and I think that no one can know for them. And we need to respect it.
Absolutely. And one final comment. I mean, it's just certain things were brought to light for me, which I haven't thought about in a long time. Another thing that is brought to light for me is the actual details of what vaccines, aside from autism. Let's put autism out for a second, the side effects of vaccines. And I think by right, we as parents should be told, you know, when you have surgery, someone sits with you and says, these are all the side effects, read this and sign it. We don't do that with vaccines. And the possible side effects are pretty scary. The things like seizure activity and so on and so forth. And it's like, oh my God, Lord, you know?
Yeah. There is a bill right now in California Assembly that is being sponsored by a lawmaker, an assemblyman in Orange County, a Republican lawmaker, that is saying since we have this law in the books that is requiring people to vaccinate in order to go to school, then this bill would force them on their website to list all of the side effects and the vaccine reporting system, all the people who have reported and how to report if you have a vaccine reaction, and all the money that has been paid out in vaccine injury court.
Amazing.
So it's a proposed bill. We'll see if it passes. We have invited that assemblyman to be on the show and have not heard back. So you know, I was like, oh, well, isn't that interesting that, and everybody's like, doesn't that already exist? And there isn't transparency at this point in the state of California. It is required. There is a law saying you have to do it, but there is no transparency at all in a visible place. You'd have to dig and look and whatever. Unfortunately, we're out of time.
I know, I'm sorry.
And there are so many questions that I wanted to get to that are so good. But these were important things that we were talking about. And I do want to take just a second to thank you for everything that you do always.
Thank you very much.
And for being there for the families and being available for the families. There have been several times lately where we've referred somebody specifically to you, and you always find a way to help and support, even when it's hard. Even I'm just thinking about the mom who was in the Philippines that I came to, and she's like, she's in the Philippines, she doesn't have the internet, she gets 1 hour to Facebook message a week, you know, and she wants to help her son, and you said, okay, what do we have in our arsenal? And you sent her a book.
Yeah, I mean, we can also print out things and send it to the Philippines. Yes. That's another thing. But it's like, you know, it's so hard.
But you sent her a book, and you always find a way. We so greatly appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Shannon.